class, we're starting the road to the Civil War. So we need to go back and look at how slavery has been growing and how we've been trying to restrain it to see one of the major reasons we're going to start the Civil War. All right, so we're going to go back first to the Northwest Ordinance. So this is when we got that land, the Northwest Territory. And we had to decide what we're going to do about slavery there. And this is in the North, and what we decided to do was NO, Northwest Ordinance, no slavery there. So with Northerners, they thought we're setting a precedent. So whenever we get new territory, we won't have slavery. Their idea was we were going to stop the spread of slavery, and eventually it would kind of die out in the South. Well, then a little bit later we get Louisiana. And remember, we get that from Napoleon in France, and we have to decide what are we going to do here. And Northerners thought we have a precedent set, no slavery, new land. But the South felt very different about it. They were worried that they're going to be losing their power, their political power as well. Because remember, in the Senate, each state gets 2 votes. So if you have lots of free states and not many slave states, they have the power and they could eventually, who knows, abolish slavery or something crazy like that. So we make the Missouri Compromise, and we make that line, 3630, and we say, no slavery above the line, slavery's cool below the line. So every time we add a free state, we're going to add a slave state. Seems good. Everyone's going to win, right? But as we know, if you look at the map, there's lots more room up north than there is down south. So eventually, this is going to mess up. So now that brings us to the Wilmot Proviso. After the Mexican-American War, we get Texas, which is clearly going to want slavery, because that's why it all started. All those cotton planters came with their slaves. But the rest of the land in the Mexican Cession, what are we going to do with that? Remember Wilmot Proviso. David Wilmot gave the idea that we shouldn't have slavery in any of that land. And that was his proviso, his little add-on to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. But his idea didn't work, which shows the tension growing even more between North and South. So we have to decide what exactly is going to happen with this land. Is it going to have slavery? Is it not? We just ruled out that it definitely won't. But we still haven't decided what to do. So this leads us to the election of 1848. And we have 3 political parties running in this. One is called the Free Soil Party. This is the new one, and if you can't guess, they want the soil to be free. So their whole thing is they don't want slavery spreading at all. It's gone as far as it should, no further. This is a fringe group. Not many people are going to vote for them, but some people like their ideas, but it's just starting. They'll get some big things going a little bit later. So for our main parties, though, we have the Democrats, and a lot of these are Southerners. Remember, the Democratic Republicans with Jefferson started in the South. They changed into the Democrats with Andrew Jackson, and they are all about having slavery out west. They think that's where they're the ones that would be spreading there anyway. It's going to help keep balance in the Senate. Everything's great about slavery down there, so Democrats are for it. And then we have the Whigs up north. Remember, these used to be the Federalists with Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, and then the party kind of died out, and Henry Clay started the Whigs to go against Jackson. So the Whigs, they don't really want to get involved. They don't want to make anyone mad, so they just kind of want to ignore the issue, and they pretend it doesn't exist, which is always a great idea. Now, Zachary Taylor is going to win this election, but we already knew that was coming because of the Mexican-American War. And he's a Whig. And the Whigs are going to want to ignore the issue, but it's not going to get ignored. Things are going to heat up because now we have to decide what's going to happen with this new territory. So what we do is we call back the greatest compromiser that ever lived, the great compromiser, Henry Clay. He is an old man, but he's still kicking. So this is his last shot. It's been 30 years since he made his last compromise, but now he's going to make a compromise with the awesome name, the Compromise of 1850. So, with the Compromise of 1850, there will be 4 parts. One of the parts of the Compromise of 1850 is California is going to be added as a free state. The North is going to love this because we're not adding a slave state, which goes against the Missouri Compromise, that whole add one, add one, add one, add one. So good for the North. And we're going to do something else. We're going to stop slave trade in Washington, D.C. Now, that slave trade, we didn't actually stop slavery there, but it's a step in the right direction. So if the North gets those two things, remember this is a compromise, the South has to get something too. So the first thing we get is the Mexican Cession is going to use this new thing called popular sovereignty. You need to know what popular sovereignty is. Hint, all right? Popular sovereignty is where each state is actually going to vote for themselves if they want slavery or not. The people in the states are going to vote and decide. So it's not just the government voting, the people will choose for themselves if they have slavery or not. So this at least gives the option of slavery there, but not necessarily. So we'll see what happens with that. The last part, though, is the Fugitive Slave Act. And this is going to be the part that infuriates Northerners. So we already had a Fugitive Slave Act in the Constitution. You know, if there's a slave and you know it, you need to kind of send them back to where they go. But it's not really enforced. It's not that big of a deal. Now, this is a huge deal. So all Northerners must turn over any escaped slaves or face punishment. And they're not kidding around. Severe punishments could be in line. So really, now everyone is a slave catcher. Whether you like slavery, you dislike slavery, it is your duty. You must do that. And what's even worse is if one person in court says you are an escaped slave, then you are an escaped slave. You might have been born free, you've been free your entire life, and you're up in Massachusetts. But if one person says you are, then you are. All right? This is a big deal. Really, that means you can't be free anywhere. So if you really want to be free, you better keep going north and go up to Canada, eh? Now, there are a couple different viewpoints on the Fugitive Slave Act. Free Soil Party obviously hates it. The Whigs, well, it's going to make the Northerners mad, and so they don't like that. They don't want to make anyone mad. They just kind of want to keep it cool. So there's one Whig in particular who's going to bring up the fight about this, and his name is Daniel Webster. And he's a senator, and he's just going to argue that the Fugitive Slave Act is wrong. So he's going to try to vote against it. What's ironic is he looks a lot like the guy on the other side, John C. Calhoun. Remember, one of our favorite guys?
I feel pretty, oh so pretty. I feel pretty and witty, and I pity any girl who's in need today.
He loves the Fugitive Slave Act because he thinks it supports states' rights. Because the states have a right to what? Their property. And their property is their slaves. So it's kind of like if my car gets stolen and someone drives it to California. If so, you're in California and you know that this is a stolen car, you need to report it to the police. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's my car. That's what they think of when they think of slaves escaping and going up north, is it's their property that's just kind of ran away. So you can see his point of view a little bit if they weren't human beings.
Everything's going great for a while, but then a Democrat becomes president. His name's Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce is pretty weak, and he kind of listens to what everyone tells him to do. So he gets involved in something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This act goes even further in getting rid of the Missouri Compromise. They decide to let the territories of Kansas and Nebraska choose for themselves if they want popular sovereignty. So they vote, and Nebraska decides they won't have slavery, but Kansas isn't so sure.